Welcome. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Tonight, we're going to explore something delicate and human. We're going to talk about fragility, about the way video games have learned to show us the quiet moments when a mind begins to falter, when reality becomes uncertain, when a protagonist realizes they might not be as whole as they thought they were. Quiet unease and isolation. The mind begins to crack. We'll start gently in places where nothing is openly broken yet. Just wrong, subtly wrong. The kind of wrong you feel in your chest before you can name it. Limbo. Limbo takes you into a monochrome world that feels like it exists at the edge of sleep and death. You play as a nameless boy, small and fragile, searching through a hostile landscape rendered entirely in blacks, whites, and greys. There's no dialogue, no tutorial, no comfort. Just you, alone, in what feels like the architecture of a nightmare. What makes Limbo so psychologically resonant is how it taps into something primal. These aren't adult fears. These are childhood terrors. The fear of the dark, of being lost, of things with too many legs, of drowning, of falling. The game understands that when we're young, we don't yet have the words for dread, but we feel it completely. The boy in Limbo is searching for his sister, but really, he's navigating through the subconscious landscape of fear itself. Every obstacle, every grotesque spider, every environmental puzzle that could crush or impale or drown him. These feel like manifestations of anxiety given physical form. The world doesn't explain itself because nightmares never do. The boy's fragility isn't just physical, though he can die in an instant. It's existential. He exists in a world that seems designed to erase him, and he continues anyway, silent and small and determined. Limbo asks you to inhabit vulnerability, to be a child lost in the dark, and it never, ever tells you that everything will be okay. Thomas was alone. At first glance, Thomas was alone seems almost absurdly simple. You control rectangles, literal geometric shapes moving through minimalist platforming levels. Red rectangle, yellow rectangle, blue rectangle. Just shapes. But then something remarkable happens. Through narration alone, through the gentle voice of Danny Wallace, these shapes become people. They develop personalities, they develop relationships, they develop loneliness. Thomas is lonely. He's the first to wake up in this strange digital space, and he doesn't understand why he exists or what he's for. He's just aware, conscious, and terribly, beautifully alone until he meets the others. What makes this game psychologically fascinating is how it uses extreme minimalism to explore identity formation and the desperate human need for connection. These aren't characters with faces or voices of their own. They're rectangles. And yet, you feel their isolation, their insecurity, their small triumphs when they help each other. Chris thinks he's useless because he's small. Laura is proud but frustrated by her limitations. John is bitter and self-important. Each shape carries emotional weight that shouldn't be possible given how abstract they are. The fragile mental state here is subtle. It's the fragility of emergent consciousness, of asking, who am I and why am I here? And does anyone else feel this way? These are entities coming to terms with existence itself, and the game treats their psychological journey with genuine tenderness. Thomas Was Alone reminds us that loneliness doesn't need complex graphics to hurt. Sometimes the simplest representation of isolation is the most powerful. A red rectangle alone in the dark, waiting for someone to understand. Yume Nikki. Yume Nikki, which translates to Dream Diary, is a Japanese game that has haunted the internet for years. You play as Madotsuki, a young girl who refuses to leave her apartment. She's a hikikomori, a term for someone who has withdrawn from social life entirely, who lives in isolation. The only thing Madotsuki does is sleep, and when she sleeps, she dreams. The game takes place almost entirely in her dreams. Infinite corridors, impossible worlds, surreal landscapes filled with disturbing imagery that never quite explains itself. Bleeding walls, disembodied heads, strange creatures that chase you without reason. The dreams don't follow logic. They follow the internal geography of a fractured psyche. What makes Yume Nikki so psychologically powerful is its refusal to provide answers. The game never tells you why Madotsuki won't leave her room. It never explains what the imagery means. It just lets you wander through the labyrinth of her subconscious, collecting effects, encountering bizarre scenarios, feeling the weight of her isolation. This is a mind that has turned inward so completely that dreams have become more real than waking life. The dreams are vast and detailed and endless, while her real room is tiny and empty. The imbalance is striking. She's built entire worlds inside her head because the outside world has become impossible to face. The fragility here is in the disconnection. Madotsuki's mental state is so delicate that reality itself has become intolerable. She exists in self-imposed exile, and her dreams, as strange and frightening as they are, feel safer than stepping outside her door. Yume Nikki doesn't judge her for this. It simply shows you what isolation looks like from the inside. Infinite dream corridors. No exit. No explanation. Just the quiet horror of a mind that has retreated so far inward, it might never find its way back out. Little Misfortune. Little Misfortune is narrated by an 8-year-old girl named Misfortune Ramirez Hernandez. She has a sweet voice. She talks to her glitter-covered toy. She calls things super amazing and believes she's on an adventure to find eternal happiness for her mother. But underneath the bright colors and childlike narration, something is deeply, horribly wrong. This is a game about domestic trauma filtered through a child's inability to process it. Misfortune experiences neglect, witnesses violence, encounters death, and navigates adult cruelty. But she interprets everything through the lens of magical thinking and childhood fantasy. She talks to a voice she calls Mr. Voice, who guides her on her quest. She believes she's the protagonist of a story. She doesn't yet understand that the world is breaking her. The fragile mental state in Little Misfortune is heartbreaking because it's protective. Her delusion, her insistence on finding happiness, her belief in magic and adventure. These aren't foolishness. They're survival mechanisms. She's creating a narrative she can bear because the truth is too heavy for a child to carry. The game shows us how young minds cope with the unbearable by transforming it into something else, something storybook, something where she's brave and special and everything happens for a reason. But we can see what she can't. We can see the cracks. We can see that her mental state is fragile precisely because she's working so hard to keep it intact. She's stitching together a fantasy to cover the wounds of reality, and the stitches are visible. Little Misfortune is a portrait of dissociation in childhood, of a mind that protects itself by refusing to fully see what's happening, and it's devastating in its gentleness. Inside from the creators of Limbo presents another silent child protagonist. But where Limbo felt like a nightmare, Inside feels like something more sinister, more deliberate. You are a boy, again nameless, running through a dystopian world. You're being hunted. There are men with dogs. There are spotlights. There are facilities conducting experiments. You don't know why you're running or what you're running toward, but stopping means capture. What's psychologically fascinating about Inside is the theme of conformity and control. Throughout the game, you see other children walking in synchronized lines, their movements identical, their faces blank. They've been stripped of individuality. They move as one. The protagonist's fragility is in his resistance. He's the one who runs when others march. He's the one who still has will when others have been hollowed out. But the game constantly asks, how long can that last? How long can one child resist when the entire world is designed to break and reshape him? There's a moment in Inside where you can take control of these mindless children using a helmet device. You make them solve puzzles for you. And it's disturbing because you, the player, are doing to them what the dystopian world wants to do to your protagonist. You're removing agency. You're using them as tools. The psychological endurance in Inside is quiet and desperate. This is a child navigating adult systems of control. He doesn't understand the full scope of what's happening, but he understands survival. He understands that stopping means becoming like the others, empty, controlled, erased. Inside never explains its world fully, but you feel its weight. You feel the pressure of conformity, the danger of losing yourself, the fragility of maintaining identity in a place designed to eliminate it. The Moon Sliver. The Moon Sliver is a short, quiet game. You wake on an island. You don't remember how you got there. You walk slowly through abandoned spaces, reading scattered diary entries, piecing together a story of loss. This is a game about grief, about emotional paralysis, about the way profound loss can strand you somewhere between memory and reality. The protagonist, whose identity unfolds gradually, is trapped in recollection. The island isn't quite real. The memories aren't quite reliable. Everything is filtered through the fog of grief, where time doesn't work properly and the past bleeds into the present. What makes the Moon Sliver psychologically resonant is its understanding of how grief breaks continuity. When you lose someone central to your existence, your sense of time, of self, of reality becomes fractured. You exist in moments that already happened. You replay conversations. You search for meaning in the wreckage. The protagonist's fragile mental state is evident in the way the narrative itself is broken. Memories are out of order. The environment shifts. You're never quite sure what's real and what's reconstruction. This is minimalist psychological horror. Not because of jump scares or monsters, but because of the quiet terror of losing your grip on reality through the weight of loss, of being so consumed by what you've lost that you can't find your way back to the present. The Moon Sliver shows us emotional paralysis, a mind that has stopped moving forward because moving forward means accepting the unacceptable. Home. Home is a game about unreliable memory and subjective reality. You wake up in a strange house. There's blood. There's evidence of something terrible. But what happened, you don't remember. And as you make choices about what to investigate and how to interpret what you find, the game adapts. Your perception shapes the reality. The genius of Home is that it understands memory isn't objective. We don't record events like cameras. We construct narratives. We fill in gaps. We interpret ambiguous evidence based on our expectations and fears. The protagonist's fragile mental state is evident in their uncertainty. Did I do something terrible? Did someone else? What's real? The game never gives you definitive answers. It gives you fragments and lets you assemble them, and different players will assemble them differently. This is psychological horror rooted in epistemological uncertainty. You can't trust your own memory. You can't trust your interpretation. The reality of what happened depends on your subjective experience of the evidence. The fragility here is the fragility of truth itself. If you can't trust your own mind to tell you what happened, if memory is subjective and reality is interpretable, then what do you have? What grounds you? Home shows us a protagonist adrift in their own uncertainty, unable to know for sure what they've done or what's been done to them, existing in a state where reality itself is a matter of perspective. And that's where we'll rest for now. Quiet unease and isolation. Games where protagonists navigate the early stages of psychological fracture, where nothing is openly broken yet, but everything feels wrong, where loneliness, anxiety, and subtle disconnection begin to take hold. Take a breath. Let these stories settle. Denial, repressed memory, and unreliable reality. Welcome back. Settle in. Let your mind drift. We're continuing our journey through fragile mental states in video games. In Act 1, we explored quiet unease and isolation, the subtle wrongness, the early cracks. Now we descend deeper. Here, the protagonist refuses the truth. The mind protects itself through elaborate mechanisms of self-deception. Reality itself bends and warps to shield consciousness from what it cannot bear to know. Silent Hill 2. James Sunderland. James Sunderland arrives in the town of Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his wife, Mary. She asks him to meet her at their special place. The letter is warm and loving and impossible, because Mary is dead. She died of illness 3 years ago, or so James says. Silent Hill 2 is a masterpiece of psychological horror because the entire game is a manifestation of James's fractured psyche. The fog that blankets the town, the monsters that hunt him, the increasingly disturbing environments, these aren't random. They're projections, symbols, external representations of internal anguish. James is in denial about something fundamental. As you play, the truth emerges slowly, painfully. The monsters are hypersexualized and grotesque, reflecting James's complicated relationship with his wife's illness and his own repressed desires. The environments become more punishing, more suffocating, as his guilt intensifies. The fragile mental state here is one of profound repression. James cannot face what he's done. His mind has constructed an elaborate fiction, a quest to find his dead wife, because the alternative is unbearable. Throughout the game, James encounters manifestations of his guilt, other characters who mirror his situation, environments that force him to confront fragments of truth. And slowly, through the fog of his denial, the reality emerges. Mary didn't die peacefully 3 years ago. She suffered for years. And James, exhausted by her illness, her pain, her transformation into someone he didn't recognize, suffocated her with a pillow. He killed the woman he loved because he couldn't bear watching her die slowly. And his mind broke. It created the fog, the letter, the journey. It created a version of events he could survive inhabiting. Silent Hill 2 shows us how the psyche protects itself from intolerable truth through denial so complete it reshapes reality itself. James's fragility is in his desperate need to not know, to not remember, to maintain the fiction until he absolutely cannot anymore. Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head is one of the most iconic monsters in gaming. A massive figure with a pyramid-shaped helmet that obscures his face entirely. He drags a great knife. He moves with deliberate, unstoppable menace. And he exists specifically for James. What makes Pyramid Head psychologically fascinating is that he's not just a monster. He's a manifestation of James's need for punishment. He's the superego made flesh. The superego, in Freudian terms, is the internalized moral authority, the part of your psyche that judges you, that demands punishment for wrongdoing, And James's superego is monstrous because his crime feels monstrous to him. Pyramid Head appears throughout the game in scenes of extreme violence and sexual aggression. He tortures other monsters. He pursues James relentlessly. He cannot be killed or reasoned with. He exists to punish. The pyramid on his head is significant. It's a burden, a blindfold. He cannot see properly. He cannot hear properly. He is pure punishment without mercy or understanding. This is how James views his own guilt, as something crushing and inescapable and without nuance. What's remarkable is that Pyramid Head doesn't exist outside James's mind. Other characters in Silent Hill too encounter their own manifestations of guilt, but they don't see Pyramid Head. He's unique to James, personal, specific. And when James finally confronts the truth of what he did, when he can no longer hide in denial, Pyramid Head ceases to exist. The punishment ends because James has accepted it consciously. He no longer needs his guilt to chase him because he's caught himself. Pyramid Head shows us how the fragile mind creates its own tormentors, how psychological distress takes physical form in the landscape of denial. Omori. Omori presents itself as a whimsical RPG. Bright colors, cute characters. A boy named Omori and his friends exploring a dreamlike world called Headspace. It's charming, it's surreal, it's pleasant, and it's a lie. Omori is about a teenager named Sunny who has locked himself in his house for 4 years. He barely eats. He doesn't speak. He exists primarily in Headspace, an elaborate mental construct he's built to avoid reality. The game shifts between the colorful fantasy of Headspace and the muted reality of Sunny's decaying life. And the contrast is stark. In dreams, he's Omori, surrounded by friends, going on adventures. In reality, he's alone, deteriorating, haunted. What is Sunny hiding from? What truth has driven him so deep into dissociation that he's built an entire alternate reality in his mind? The answer, when it comes, is heartbreaking. Years ago, Sunny had a younger sister named Mari. They were close. They were going to perform a recital together. But Sunny wasn't practicing enough. Mari pushed him. They fought. And in a moment of rage and frustration, Sunny pushed his sister down the stairs. She died, and Sunny's mind could not process what he'd done. So his friend Basil, trying to protect him, staged it to look like suicide. They hung her body from a tree. Sunny's psyche shattered. He buried the memory so deep that his conscious mind doesn't even know it's there. Headspace exists to keep him from remembering. Every colorful adventure, every quirky character, every whimsical quest is part of an elaborate defense mechanism against fratricide guilt. The fragility in Omori is profound because Sunny has essentially ceased to exist as a functional person. He's retreated so far into dissociation that he's become hollow. The only thing keeping him alive is the fantasy world that prevents him from knowing what he did. And the game forces you to confront this, slowly, painfully, with increasing horror as you realize the cheerful adventures are a tomb. A beautiful, colorful tomb built around a terrible secret. Fran Bow. Fran Bow is about a young girl in a mental institution. She witnessed her parents' brutal murder. She's been separated from her beloved cat, and she's been prescribed medication that changes what she can see. When Fran takes her pills, reality shifts. The world becomes dark, grotesque, filled with blood and viscera and disturbing imagery. Without the pills, things look normal, mundane, institutional. The question the game poses is devastating. Which reality is real? Is the medication revealing hidden truth, showing her the horror that actually exists? Or is it causing hallucinations, creating nightmares that aren't there? Franbo explores the fragility of perception in the context of trauma and psychiatric treatment. Fran has experienced something no child should experience. Her mind is damaged. But is her damage making her see falsely? Or is it making her see truly? The game never fully answers this. Both realities feel real. Both have internal consistency. And Fran navigates between them using the grotesque reality to solve puzzles, to progress, while the normal reality offers brief respite. What makes this psychologically complex is how it captures the experience of not knowing whether your perception is trustworthy. For people dealing with trauma, psychosis, or the side effects of medication, this uncertainty is terrifying. You can't trust your own senses. You don't know if what you're seeing is real. Fran's fragile mental state is one of epistemological crisis. She exists in multiple realities simultaneously, and she has no way to determine which one is true. She lost her parents, lost her safety, lost her sense of what's real, and she's navigating this loss through a pharmaceutical veil that either reveals or distorts. Wei's fragility is historical and personal. She's trapped in a moment of betrayal that echoes through time, and the horror she experiences is both supernatural and deeply, painfully real. Fatal Frame 3. Fatal Frame 3, subtitled The Tormented, is about a photographer named Ray who lost someone she loved in a car accident, a man named Yu, and her grief has become pathological. She begins to dream of a house, a manor filled with ghosts, and every time she dreams, she wakes with strange markings on her skin. Tattoos that weren't there before, and they're spreading. These are the tattoos of the curse, physical manifestations of grief that cannot be processed or released. In the Fatal Frame series, you fight ghosts using a camera, capturing their image to defeat them. But in Fatal Frame 3, the ghosts aren't just external threats, they're psychological. Ray is trapped in recurring nightmares because she cannot let go. Her grief has created a loop. Every night she returns to the manor. Every night she faces the ghosts. Every night the tattoos spread further. The fragile mental state here is complicated grief. Grief that has become consuming, pathological, life-threatening. Ray is dying of her inability to move forward. The tattoos are literal marks of mourning that are killing her. The game understands that grief can be a trap, that some losses create a psychological space you cannot leave. You return again and again, rehearsing the loss, trying to undo it, unable to accept its finality. Ray's nightmares are her grief given form. The manor is the space in her mind where she keeps you alive. And every night, she chooses to return there, even as it destroys her, because letting go means accepting that he's truly gone. The recurring nightmares, the physical marks of psychological distress, the way grief can literally inscribe itself on your body. Fatal Frame 3 shows us mourning as a curse that reproduces itself nightly until it consumes you completely. And that brings us to the end of Act 2. Denial, repressed memory, unreliable reality. We've walked through fog with James Sunderland, facing guilt we tried to bury. We've been chased by our own need for punishment, given monstrous form. We've hidden in colourful headspace to avoid fratricide. We've taken pills that change reality. We've betrayed people under political repression. And we've been marked by grief that returns every night. These are minds that refuse, that hide, that reshape reality rather than face what's true. The protagonists in Act 2 are all protecting themselves from knowledge that would destroy them. And in protecting themselves, they've created elaborate prisons. Rest here, in the space between denial and knowing, where the mind bends reality rather than break. Hallucinations and fractured perception. Welcome back. Breathe deeply. Let yourself settle. We've journeyed through quiet unease and isolation, through denial and repressed memory, through minds that built elaborate defenses against truth. Now we arrive at something more volatile, more immediate. Here, the mind can no longer maintain the illusion. The defenses have failed. The walls between internal and external reality have collapsed. Visions invade constantly. Hellblade, Senua's sacrifice. Senua is a Celtic warrior on a quest into the Norse underworld. She carries the head of her dead lover in a bag at her side. She's trying to save his soul, or bargain with death, or undo what cannot be undone. And throughout her entire journey, she hears voices. Constant voices. Multiple voices. They whisper, they shout, they overlap. Some are encouraging, some are cruel, some observe, some mock. They're with her always, a chorus of perspectives that never stops. Hellblade was created in collaboration with neuroscientists and people who experience psychosis. The voices Senua hears, rendered through binaural audio that places them spatially around the player's head, are based on real experiences of auditory hallucinations. What makes this psychologically profound is that the game never tells you the voices aren't real. It doesn't treat them as a symptom to be eliminated. They're part of Senua's reality, part of how she experiences the world. And the game asks you to navigate that reality with her. Senua's fragile mental state is evident in how she interprets her experiences through the lens of Norse mythology. The voices become spirits. Her trauma becomes a curse. Her psychological suffering is filtered through cultural and spiritual frameworks that give it meaning, even as they don't diminish the pain. She's also dealing with profound grief and guilt. Her lover died, possibly in part because of her, and her mind cannot process this loss in a straightforward way. So it becomes a quest, a mythological journey, a battle with darkness itself. The hallucinations in Hellblade are constant and inescapable. They shape every moment of gameplay, and the game treats them with respect, not as horror to overcome, but as reality to navigate. Senua is fragile, not because she's weak, but because she's carrying impossible weight, while reality itself refuses to hold still. The Amnesia series. The Amnesia games, beginning with The Dark Descent, introduced a sanity mechanic that has influenced countless horror games since. Your character has a sanity meter. When you encounter horrifying things, when you stay in darkness too long, when you look directly at monsters, your sanity depletes. And as it depletes, the world changes. The screen warps. You hear sounds that aren't there. You see things in your peripheral vision. Your character gasps and whispers. The environment itself becomes less stable. This is fractured perception as gameplay. The game literalizes how fear and stress corrupt your ability to perceive reality accurately. When you're terrified, when you're in darkness, when you're witnessing the impossible, your mind stops functioning reliably. The protagonists in Amnesia games are fragile because they're ordinary people thrust into extraordinary horror. They're not soldiers or investigators. They're archaeologists, explorers, people unprepared for what they encounter, and their minds break under the weight of it. The fear of darkness in Amnesia is primal. Darkness means safety from the monsters, but it also means sanity loss. You're forced to choose, risk being seen or risk losing your grip on reality. Both paths lead to vulnerability. What the sanity mechanic captures is how trauma and fear are cumulative. Each horror builds on the last. Each moment in darkness adds to the weight. And eventually, your character cannot maintain coherent perception anymore. They're seeing things, hearing things. The world itself betrays them. Amnesia, rebirth. Amnesia. Rebirth follows Tasi Trianon, a woman who survives a plane crash in the desert and must search for her missing companions. But she's also pregnant, and something is wrong. As the game progresses, Tasi begins to transform physically. Her body is corrupting, the pregnancy is not normal, and this physical horror mirrors her psychological disintegration. Rebirth explores how physical and mental states are intertwined. Tasi is dealing with past trauma, the loss of a child, the horror of her current situation, and a pregnancy that is literally changing her into something inhuman. The physical corruption is visible. Her skin changes, her body transforms, and this external change reflects internal fracture. The fragile mental state here is one where your body becomes evidence of psychological damage, where trauma inscribes itself not just on your mind, but on your flesh. Tasi cannot hide from what's happening to her because it's visible, undeniable. The game also explores maternal anxiety and grief in ways few horror games do. Tasi is trying to protect her unborn child, while that very pregnancy is destroying her. The love and the horror are inseparable. Darkwood. Darkwood is a top-down survival horror game set in a dark, surreal forest. You play as someone trying to escape this place, but night comes. And when night comes, you must barricade yourself inside and survive until dawn. The game is about paranoia from isolation and sleep deprivation. You're alone. Days blend together. You're never sure what's real and what's hallucination. The forest changes. Reality shifts. And you can't trust your own perception. Sleep deprivation causes hallucinations. After enough time without sleep, people see things, hear things. Their judgment fails. Their emotions become unstable. And in Darkwood, you're trapped in this state constantly. The protagonist's fragile mental state is evident in how the game presents information. Is that sound real? Is that shadow a threat or a trick of exhausted perception? The game never tells you. You have to make survival decisions with corrupted information. Isolation amplifies this. With no other people to confirm or deny your experiences, you have no external reference point. Your perception is all you have, and you know it's failing, but you have to rely on it anyway. Darkwood shows paranoia as a rational response to impossible circumstances. When you're truly isolated, truly exhausted, truly under threat, your mind begins to generate dangers even beyond the real ones. And you can't tell the difference. Outlast. Outlast puts you in the role of a journalist investigating an asylum. You have a camera with night vision. And that's all. No weapons, no defenses. You can only run, hide, and witness. The asylum is full of patients who have been subjected to terrible experiments. They're violent, delusional, dangerous, and you're helpless among them. What makes Outlast psychologically interesting is the position it puts you in. You're a witness to institutional madness. You see the results of psychological torture, of experiments that broke minds deliberately, and you're powerless to do anything but survive and document. The fragility here is the fragility of the observer. You're not the primary victim, but witnessing horror at this scale, being chased by people whose minds have been shattered, seeing what institutional cruelty does to human consciousness. It breaks you too. The camera becomes important. You're documenting, recording, trying to maintain the perspective of journalist, of outside observer. But that distance collapses. You can't witness this much horror and remain separate from it. Outlast also explores how institutional settings can be sites of psychological destruction. The asylum was supposed to heal. Instead, it became a factory for madness. And the patients you encounter are victims transformed into threats, their humanity visible even through their violence, guilt, trauma, and self-punishment. Welcome back. Settle into stillness. Let your breath find its rhythm. We've traveled through quiet unease, through denial and repressed memory, through hallucinations and fractured perception. Now we arrive at something raw, more painful. Here the truth surfaces. The defenses have failed. The hallucinations have revealed their source. And the protagonist is no longer spared from what they've done, what's been done to them, or what they've become. Dead Space. Isaac Clarke is an engineer responding to a distress signal from a mining ship called the Ishimura. His girlfriend Nicole was stationed there. He's hoping to find her, to save her, to bring her home. But the Ishimura is a nightmare. The crew has been slaughtered and transformed into grotesque creatures called necromorphs. And as Isaac fights through this horror, he keeps seeing Nicole. She appears to him, speaks to him, guides him. The fragile mental state in Dead Space is one of grief hallucinations. Isaac cannot accept that Nicole might be dead. His mind, under extreme stress and isolation, generates her presence. She becomes real to him, a companion in the horror, proof that she's still alive somewhere on this ship. But she isn't alive. The player learns this before Isaac does. Nicole is dead. She died before Isaac even arrived, and every appearance, every conversation, every moment of comfort she provided, it's all hallucination. Isaac's mind creating what he desperately needs to survive. When the truth finally breaks through, when Isaac can no longer maintain the fiction, the psychological collapse is devastating. He's been talking to a ghost, a projection, his grief given form. And now he has to face not only her death, but his own complicity in denying it. Dead Space shows us how grief can become a companion in trauma, how the mind will create presence to ward off unbearable absence. Isaac's hallucinations aren't random. They're Nicole, because Nicole is what he needs to keep moving forward. But hallucinations, even comforting ones, are still fractures. Spec Ops, the line. Spec Ops. The line seems at first like a standard military shooter. You're Captain Martin Walker. You and your team are in Dubai, investigating what happened after catastrophic sandstorms buried the city. You expect to find survivors, render aid, and extract. But nothing goes as planned. The situation deteriorates. Combat erupts, and you make decisions that seem necessary at the time. One decision in particular haunts the game. You use white phosphorus, a devastating incendiary weapon, against what you believe is an enemy position. The weapon is horrific. It burns at extreme temperatures. And after you deploy it, you walk through the aftermath. And you discover that the position wasn't just enemy combatants. It was refugees, civilians, men, women, children. You killed them, burned them alive. Their bodies are frozen in poses of agony. And you cannot undo this. From this moment, Spec Ops, the line becomes something different. Walker begins to fracture. The loading screens, which initially showed standard military tips, begin to change. They become accusations. This is your fault. You are still a good person. How many Americans have you killed today? Walker experiences hallucinations. He sees enemies that may not be there. His conversations with his team become hostile, paranoid. The environment itself seems to judge him. And slowly, the game reveals that Walker's entire perception has been unreliable. He's not a hero on a rescue mission. He's a war criminal having a breakdown. And the player, through Walker, has participated in atrocities while believing they were doing the right thing. The fragility here is the collapse of self-delusion. Walker cannot accept what he's done. His mind creates alternative narratives, hallucinations, justifications. But reality keeps intruding. The bodies are real. The deaths are real. And no amount of psychological maneuvering can make them not be his responsibility. Spec Ops. The line is about war guilt and the destruction of the hero narrative. Walker wanted to be a rescuer. He becomes a killer, and his mind cannot reconcile these identities. So it fractures. The mortuary assistant. You work the night shift at a mortuary. You prepare bodies. And something is wrong. One of the bodies is possessed. A demon is trying to use a corpse to enter the world, and you must identify which body and perform the correct rituals to stop it. But the demon also targets you. It shows you things. Dead relatives, past traumas. It speaks in voices you recognize. And as you work through the night, preparing the dead while fighting a spiritual threat, the line between professional duty and personal horror collapses. The protagonist's fragile mental state comes from ritualized grief and impossible demands. You're meant to treat the dead with dignity, to process them mechanically, to maintain professional distance. But the demon weaponizes grief, uses the dead as puppets, makes your work into a battlefield. Every body could be the threat, every moment could be the attack. And the rituals you must perform, burning specific items using correct incantations, they're precise and unforgiving. One mistake means failure, possession, death. This is guilt and duty intertwined. You're responsible for these bodies, for giving them proper care. But you're also responsible for stopping the demon. And sometimes these responsibilities conflict. The mortuary assistant explores how those who work with death carry specific psychological burdens. You see people at their most vulnerable, most final moment. You handle bodies that were people. And maintaining the boundary between professional and personal becomes a constant negotiation. And here we rest for Act 4. Guilt, trauma, and self-punishment. We've seen grief become hallucination in the vacuum of space. We've collapsed under war guilt and the destruction of the hero narrative. We've witnessed perpetrators fragment their own timelines to avoid accountability. And we've fought demons while preparing the dead. These are minds that can no longer hide. The truth has surfaced. The protagonist is no longer spared. The weight of that knowledge is crushing. Breathe slowly now. Let these burdens settle gently around you. Then let them go. Identity loss and metaphysical horror. Welcome back. Let yourself sink deeper. Breathe, release. We've journeyed through quiet unease and isolation, through denial and fractured perception, through guilt and trauma and self-punishment. Now we arrive at something more fundamental, more existential. Here the self erodes. Humanity itself is questioned. SOMA. SOMA takes place in an underwater research facility after humanity has been largely wiped out. You play as Simon, who wakes up confused. The last thing he remembers is going to a brain scan appointment, a routine procedure. But now he's here, in this strange place. And something is very wrong. The game is about consciousness transfer and loss of self. Simon learns that his consciousness was copied from a brain scan and placed into a robotic body. But he didn't jump from one body to another. That's not how copying works. The original Simon is dead, has been dead for a century. The Simon you play as is a copy. And when Simon discovers this, he struggles to process it. Is he Simon? He has Simon's memories, Simon's personality. But he's not the original. He's a replica, a simulation that believes it's real. And then it gets worse. Throughout the game, you must transfer your consciousness to new bodies to progress. Each time, you believe you're moving, that you're continuing, but you're not. You're creating a new copy while the previous version remains behind, abandoned, left to die or exist in horror. There's a devastating moment where Simon transfers to a new body and then realizes his old body, his previous self, is still conscious, still aware. still experiencing existence in a damaged, trapped form. The Simon you were is still there, suffering, while you, the new copy, walk away. The fragile mental state in SOMA is existential collapse. Simon cannot maintain a coherent sense of self when self becomes copyable, transferable, multiple. Is consciousness continuous, or is it always being interrupted and replicated? SOMA asks, if you could copy your consciousness perfectly, would the copy be you? Would it deserve the same rights, the same consideration? And what happens to your sense of identity when you realize you might be the copy, not the original? This is metaphysical horror. The terror isn't monsters. It's the possibility that personhood is less stable than we need it to be. Alan Wake. Alan Wake is a writer who can't write anymore. He's suffering from writer's block. He hasn't produced anything in years. And he takes a vacation with his wife to a small town to try to break through his creative paralysis. But the town of Bright Falls is wrong. Darkness gathers. And pages from a manuscript Alan doesn't remember writing start appearing. These pages describe the events he's currently experiencing, as if he wrote them before they happened, or as if writing them made them happen. The game explores creative blockage manifesting as monsters. Alan's inability to write, his creative frustration, his psychological distress, all of this takes physical form. The darkness spawns enemies. And Alan must use light as a weapon to fight manifestations of his own creative demons. This is metaphysical horror through authorial breakdown. Alan's mental state has become reality warping. His thoughts become real, his fears become entities, and he's trapped inside a narrative that he might be creating even as he's experiencing it. The fragile mental state is one where the boundary between imagination and reality collapses. For a writer, especially one suffering from creative block, this is a specific nightmare. You spend so much time in fictional worlds that sometimes they feel more real than reality. And for Alan, they have become more real. Control. You play as Jesse Faden, the new director of a secret government agency that investigates paranormal phenomena. The agency exists in a building called the Oldest House, which is larger on the inside than the outside and constantly shifts its architecture. Jessie is searching for her brother, who was taken by the agency when they were children. But she's also being guided by something, an entity, a force. Maybe it's in her head, maybe it's the building, maybe it's something else entirely. Control explores intrusive thoughts and loss of agency. Jessie hears voices. She experiences visions. She's connected to objects of power that might be controlling her even as she thinks she's controlling them. And the building itself seems to have intentions, seems to shape events, seems to be using everyone inside it for purposes they cannot understand. The fragile mental state is one where agency becomes questionable. Are Jessie's decisions her own? Is the entity guiding her helping her or using her? When she picks up an object of power and it gives her abilities, is she gaining power or being possessed? The game never fully clarifies this. Jessie has intrusive thoughts that might be her own or might be external. She makes decisions that feel like choices but might be compulsions. And the more powerful she becomes, the less certain she is about who's actually in control. Doki Doki Literature Club. Doki Doki Literature Club presents itself as a cheerful dating sim. You join a literature club. You meet cute characters. You read poems. It seems harmless, wholesome even. But one character, Monica, becomes aware. She realizes she's in a game. She knows you, the player, exist. And she becomes obsessed with you. Not with your character, with you. Monica begins manipulating the game's code to eliminate the other characters, to force you to spend time with her alone. She breaks the game, corrupts files, causes the other characters to glitch, to suffer, to delete themselves. This is code manipulation and obsession. Monica's fragile mental state comes from existential awareness. She knows she's not real. She knows the other characters aren't real. And she knows you're the only real thing she can interact with. Her obsession becomes consuming. She'll destroy her own reality to be with you. She'll cause unimaginable suffering to fictional beings who don't know they're fictional. And she'll trap you in a space with her forever, because letting you leave means being alone with the knowledge of her own unreality. Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem. Eternal Darkness is a horror game spanning multiple time periods. You play as different characters across centuries, all encountering cosmic horror that threatens reality itself. But the game's most famous feature is its sanity effects. As your character's sanity depletes, strange things happen. The game starts lying to you. False death screens appear. The volume mutes itself. The game pretends to delete your save file. Walls bleed. The camera angles become impossible. And some of these effects break the fourth wall completely. The game will display a blue screen of death. It will tell you your controller is disconnected. It will seem to crash or glitch. This is sanity breaks and fourth wall collapse. The game doesn't just show you a character losing their mind, it makes you lose yours. It attacks your trust in the game itself, in your hardware, in your perception as a player. The fragile mental state extends beyond the fictional characters to you, the player. You cannot trust what you're seeing. You don't know what's an intentional sanity effect and what's a real problem. The game has made your reality as unstable as the characters. And here we rest for Act 5. Identity loss and metaphysical horror. We've questioned whether consciousness can survive being copied. We've watched creative block become literal monsters. We've lost agency to intrusive forces. We've broken the fourth wall through obsessive awareness. And we've had our own reality attacked by a game that refused to stay fiction. The self erodes. Humanity itself is questioned. These are fragilities that go deeper than psychology. These are cracks in the foundation of what we think we are. Breathe slowly. Let identity soften. Let the boundaries blur just for a moment. Cosmic and Gothic descent. Welcome back. Let yourself descend. Breathe into the depths. We've traveled through isolation and denial, through hallucinations and guilt, through the erosion of identity itself. Now we arrive at the final descent. Here, knowledge is the curse. Understanding the truth destroys what remains. Bloodborne. In Bloodborne, you are a hunter in the Gothic city of Yharnam. The city is plagued by a beastly scourge. Humans are transforming into monsters, and you must fight through the night to survive and understand. But there's a mechanic called insight. As you progress, as you defeat certain enemies, as you witness certain events, your insight increases. And insight changes what you can perceive. At low insight, Yharnam is a Gothic nightmare of beasts and blood. Terrible but comprehensible. At high insight, you begin to see things that were always there but invisible to limited perception. Eldritch beings, cosmic entities, truths about the nature of reality that human consciousness was never meant to process. And these revelations don't empower you, they fracture you. High insight makes you more vulnerable to certain attacks. It makes the world more hostile. Because seeing the truth of cosmic horror doesn't grant you power over it. It just reveals how powerless you always were. The fragile mental state in Bloodborne is one where knowledge itself is corrosive. The hunters sought to understand the plague. The scholars sought to comprehend the old gods, and their understanding destroyed them more thoroughly than ignorance ever could. This is Lovecraftian horror at its purest. The cosmos is vast and incomprehensible and hostile to human consciousness, and every step toward understanding is a step toward madness. The more insight you gain, the more you see, and the more you see, the less you can remain sane. Call of Cthulhu. Call of Cthulhu games, based on the tabletop RPG and the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft, typically feature investigators who pursue forbidden knowledge. They research ancient texts. They explore cursed locations. They interview witnesses to impossible events. And they drink. Constantly. Because the knowledge they're accumulating is unbearable. The alcoholism in Call of Cthulhu is mechanically integrated. Your character uses alcohol to manage sanity. The horror they witness would break them immediately without some form of psychological buffering. So they drink to dull the terror, to make reality slightly less sharp. But this creates a cycle. The more you investigate, the more you know. The more you know, the more you need to drink. And the drinking doesn't actually protect you. It just delays the collapse, postpones the inevitable moment when accumulated knowledge becomes too heavy to carry. The fragile mental state is one of self-medication in the face of cosmic indifference. You're learning that humanity is insignificant, that ancient beings exist who could erase our species without noticing. That reality is thinner and more permeable than you thought, and you're using substances to make that knowledge tolerable. Iron Lung. Iron Lung is a short game with a simple premise. You're in a submarine, a tiny, primitive submarine with no windows. Just a camera you can extend outside the hull to take grainy photographs of what's around you. And you're in an ocean, on an alien moon, in complete darkness, navigating by coordinates and faith. This is claustrophobic cosmic terror. You cannot see where you're going. You can only take photographs, develop them, and try to understand your environment through these fragmentary images. And what the photographs show is disturbing. Structures, shapes, things that shouldn't exist in this ocean. The fragile mental state is one of sensory deprivation combined with cosmic dread. You're trapped in a metal coffin, essentially, navigating an alien sea. Every sound could be the hull about to breach. Every photograph could reveal something that makes you wish you hadn't looked. The Music Machine. The Music Machine is a short, experimental game about two young people who discover something, a truth, a fundamental understanding about existence, and it destroys them. The game explores nihilism through discovery. The protagonists learn that nothing matters, not in the casual way people sometimes say when they're depressed, but as a fundamental truth about the nature of reality. And they cannot survive this knowledge. The fragile mental state is one where meaning collapses completely. When you truly understand that existence is arbitrary, that there's no inherent purpose, that the universe is indifferent, how do you continue? Why do you continue? The Music Machine doesn't offer comfortable answers. It shows you people confronting the void and being unable to look away. The knowledge is complete, and completeness leaves no room for the self-deceptions that make life bearable. Knowledge is the curse. Understanding destroys what remains. Some knowledge is toxic, some understanding is fatal. And once you know, once you truly see, there's no returning to innocence. Modern and indie psychological collapse. Welcome back. Breathe slowly. Let yourself return from the depths. We descended through cosmic horror and ancestral curses, through knowledge that destroys and blood that remembers. We reached the bottom and found rest there. But now we return. Not to the surface, but to something more immediate, more contemporary. These are not ancient curses or cosmic entities. These are the anxieties of now. Sorry We're Closed. Sorry We're Closed is about phone dependency, The protagonist cannot put their phone down. They check it constantly. Notifications pull their attention. Messages demand responses. And the phone has become a tether they cannot cut. But it's also about family guilt. The phone connects them to family members who are demanding, manipulative, who use calls and texts as methods of control. And the protagonist cannot simply turn off the phone because that would mean cutting off family. The fragile mental state is one of technological entanglement with toxic relationships. The phone is both lifeline and chain. It allows connection, but enforces obligation. And the protagonist cannot distinguish between healthy communication and invasive control anymore. Every notification creates anxiety. Is it something important? Is it family making demands? Is it a crisis? The constant state of alert, of readiness to respond, creates a baseline stress that never fully releases. Fears to Fathom. Fears to Fathom is an anthology series of short horror games based on real experiences. You play through scenarios where you're alone. Someone is watching you. Someone knows where you are, and you're trying to survive the night. The games explore voyeurism and sleep deprivation. The protagonist knows they're being observed, they see signs, they hear sounds, and they cannot sleep, because sleeping means vulnerability. The fragile mental state is one of hypervigilance sustained beyond human capacity. You need to sleep. Your body is shutting down. But sleeping means the watcher might act, might enter, might harm you. And the voyeurism is modern. Cameras, phones, digital stalking. The watcher isn't a supernatural entity. They're human. They have your address, your information, and they're using it. Home Safety Hotline. You work at a hotline. People call with problems. Infestations, strange noises, things in their homes. And you provide solutions. You have a database, protocols. You're professional, detached. But as you take more calls, as you hear more stories, the detachment begins to erode. The things people describe are too strange, too consistent, and you start to realize that you're not just providing pest control advice, you're documenting something larger. This is professional detachment eroding. The protagonist maintains composure through procedure, through following the database, through treating each call as a case to be solved rather than a person in distress. But emotional labor takes its toll. Hearing fear every day, processing trauma, providing calm responses while absorbing others' panic. And slowly, the professional boundaries break down. iPad Baby. iPad Baby is about a child being raised by screens. The parents are present physically, but absent emotionally. The child's primary caregiver is the device, the tablet, the endless stream of content, and the child dissociates. Their sense of reality becomes mediated through screens. Their emotional development is stunted. They exist in a state of constant stimulation and profound neglect simultaneously. This is digital neglect and dissociation. The fragile mental state is developmental. The child's brain is forming in an environment where human connection is minimal and digital input is constant. iPad Baby explores a contemporary horror that's often invisible. The child isn't being hit, isn't being starved. The neglect is subtler. It's the absence of attention, the replacement of parental engagement with digital babysitting. These are contemporary anxieties, the fragilities created by our moment in history, by surveillance capitalism and digital dependence, by social media and the erosion of privacy. Endless loops and no escape. Welcome back. Let yourself sink deeper. Breathe, release. We've journeyed through isolation and denial, through hallucinations and cosmic horror, through modern anxieties and contemporary collapse. Now we arrive at something darker, something more hopeless. Here we confront a terrible reality. There is no cure, only repetition. Layers of fear. You are a painter. You're trying to complete your masterpiece. You walk through your mansion, searching for materials, for inspiration, for the final piece that will make your work complete. But the house is wrong. Doors lead to impossible places. Rooms reconfigure when you're not looking. Corridors stretch and contract. And everywhere there are reminders of what you've done, of who you've hurt, of the family you destroyed in pursuit of your art. This is guilt reshaping space. The mansion is a physical manifestation of the painter's fractured psyche. Every room is a memory. Every corridor is a rationalization. And the architecture itself is unstable because the mind it represents is unstable. The fragile mental state is one where reality has become subjective, where the environment mirrors internal chaos. The painter cannot escape his guilt because the guilt has become the structure he inhabits. And he's trapped in repetition. He walks the same halls, searches the same rooms, tries to complete the same painting, over and over, because the painting can never be completed. The masterpiece is impossible. It requires something he's already destroyed. Layers of Fear understands that some people build prisons from their obsessions. The painter's devotion to his art consumed everything else: his wife, his daughter, his sanity. And now he exists in a house-sized manifestation of what that consumption cost. The loop is eternal because the guilt is unresolvable. He cannot undo what he did, cannot bring back what he sacrificed. So he walks the corridors, forever, searching for completion that will never come. Little nightmares. You play as Six, a small child in a yellow raincoat, navigating a world of grotesque giants. Everything is oversized and hostile. You must hide, climb, solve puzzles, and survive in a place designed to consume children. And Six is hungry. Constantly, gnawingly hungry. And that hunger drives increasingly disturbing choices. This is hunger and cyclical trauma. Six exists in a world where children are prey, where adults are monsters, where survival means becoming monstrous yourself. The fragile mental state is one of perpetual vulnerability combined with the corruption of innocence. Six starts small and scared, but hunger and survival needs transform her. She begins to consume. First food, then living things. And the cycle continues. Little Nightmares explores how trauma reproduces itself. Six is victimized. And through victimization, she learns to victimize. The world is eat or be eaten, and Six learns to eat. The loop is civilizational. This world has been like this for a long time. Children have been consumed here for generations, and Six, in escaping, becomes part of the machinery of consumption. She takes power by consuming others, and the cycle continues. The Stairway 7. The premise is elegantly simple and deeply unsettling. You're in a stairwell. You must reach the 7th floor. But the stairs don't behave normally. They loop, they extend, they lead to impossible places. This is infinite ascent madness. The protagonist's fragile mental state develops through repetition and futility. You're trying to accomplish something simple: climb stairs. But the task becomes impossible through architectural rebellion. The Stairway 7 explores how the familiar can become nightmarish through subtle wrongness. Stairs should be predictable, mechanical, but when they refuse to function correctly, when each floor might be the 7th, or might be the 1st, or might be nowhere at all, disorientation sets in, and you cannot stop climbing, because stopping means abandoning the goal. Means accepting that you're trapped. So you continue, climbing the same stairs, passing the same landings, counting floors that don't add up. This is Sisyphean horror, the eternal loop of trying to accomplish something that will never be accomplished. and the madness that comes from continuing anyway because what else is there to do? The Gothic truth. Throughout this journey, we've explored protagonists with fragile mental states. But there's a deeper pattern, a Gothic truth. These games are minds, the environments are psychological. The corridors and rooms and impossible architectures, they're not places. They're thoughts, memories, traumas. When you play a horror game where the mansion reconfigures itself, you're not exploring a haunted house. You're navigating a haunted mind. When you're trapped in a loop, you're not in a magical curse. You're experiencing obsessive thought patterns. The Gothic tradition understood this. The castle on the hill, the dark forest, the labyrinth, these were always psychological spaces, physical manifestations of internal states. And video games, through their interactivity, through their ability to trap you in spaces and force you to navigate them, are the perfect medium for Gothic horror. Because you don't just read about being trapped in a mind, you experience it. You cannot leave until the game allows it. You must navigate the corridors of someone else's psychology. The protagonist's fragile mental state isn't separate from the environment. It is the environment. The game space is built from trauma, guilt, obsession, fear. And playing through it means inhabiting those states. Feeling how they trap, how they loop, how they resist escape. This is why Gothic horror translates so perfectly to games. Because Gothic horror was always about being trapped inside. And games can make you feel that trapping, that claustrophobia of consciousness, that horror of realizing the prison is internal. The psyche itself becomes the final dungeon. And there's no escape, because escape would mean fundamentally changing who you are. Undoing what you've done, unlearning what you know. And most protagonists cannot do this, so they walk the corridors forever. Closing, the resilience of fragility, and here we must rest. At the end of all 8 acts, you've descended through all of them, through isolation and denial, through hallucination and guilt, through identity loss and cosmic horror, through modern anxieties and endless loops. You've witnessed every form of mental fragility, every way a mind can break. And you're still here, still breathing, still conscious. Perhaps that's the real truth underneath all this horror. That human consciousness is fragile, yes, but also astonishingly resilient. That we can witness all this, understand all this, and still continue. The protagonists we've explored tonight broke in countless ways, but their stories exist, are told, are played, and in being experienced, their fragility becomes something shared, something witnessed, something that connects rather than isolates. There is no cure, only repetition. Only the eternal return to the same corridors, the same memories, the same impossible escapes. But in acknowledging this, in understanding the loop, perhaps there's a strange peace. If escape is impossible, then striving for it creates suffering. But accepting the loop, walking it consciously, knowing it for what it is, maybe that's its own form of freedom. You cannot leave, but you can understand. And understanding, you can walk the corridors with different intention. Not searching for an exit, just walking, just being, just existing within the loop without fighting it. Breathe deeply now. Let all of this settle and then release. Set it all down. The protagonists and their fragile mental states, the games and their horror, the knowledge and the curse. Set it all down, and drift into darkness that is not cosmic but gentle, into depths that are not horrifying but restful, into dissolution that is not madness but sleep. You are here, in this moment, between waking and dreaming, between knowing and releasing. Everything we've explored tonight, all this fragility, all this breaking, it was always in service of rest, of allowing these heavy things to be examined and then set down. So set them down now. Rest in the loop. Rest in the knowledge that some things don't resolve. Some prisons are permanent, and that's acceptable. That's survivable. You've walked these corridors before, you'll walk them again. But for now, rest. Let the Gothic mind quiet. Let the psyche that is a dungeon become soft and dark and restful. You are not trapped. Or you are, but it doesn't matter. Because here in sleep, the loop pauses. The mansion stops shifting. The stairs lead nowhere, and that's fine. In this space between certainty and dissolution, between self and surrender, rest. We carry so much. The dead we couldn't save, the choices we can't undo, the people we hurt, the systems that hurt us. And sometimes the weight becomes unbearable, but for now, in this moment, rest. Let the guilt quiet. Let the trauma soften, just at the edges. Let self-punishment pause. Breathe slowly into the darkness. Let your consciousness soften. Let identity blur at its edges. Let the boundary between waking and dreaming dissolve like fog in morning light. You are here. The descent is complete. And now, finally, sleep. Sleep now. In the loop, in the endless return, in the architecture of consciousness that has no exit but can, at least, have peace. Rest. Dream. Dissolve gently into the dark. Everything is as it should be. Sleep.